The air was thick with anticipation as I entered the upscale steakhouse in downtown Chicago. My palms were sweaty. I could feel my heart racing. At 35, I was easily a decade older than the fresh-faced college graduates eagerly chatting around the long mahogany table. This was supposed to be an orientation dinner for new hires at Sullivan Enterprises, but I already felt like an outsider. As I hesitated near the entrance, a sharply dressed man in his early 30s approached me with a somewhat condescending smile.
"Ah, you must be Jack Thompson,"
he said, eyeing me up and down.
"I'm Brandon Matthews, Vice President of Operations. Your resume was quite interesting."
I extended my hand, trying to mask my nervousness. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Matthews. I'm excited to join the team and contribute my experience from various...
Yes.
Brandon cut me off, waving his hand dismissively.
I'm sure your diverse background will be quite something. Now, let's find you a seat, shall we?
He guided me past the main table where the other new hires were seated, chatting excitedly about their Ivy League alma maters and summer internships. Instead, Brandon led me to a small table near the restrooms, partially obscured by a large potted plant.
"Here we are,"
he said with a smirk.
"I think this will be perfect for someone of your unique qualification."
I felt my face flush with embarrassment. Sir, I don't mean to cause any trouble, but wouldn't it be better if I sat with the rest of the new hires? I'm eager to get to know my colleagues. Brandon's smile tightened.
"Now, Jack, let's be realistic. You're what, 35? No college degree and a resume full of random restaurant jobs. The rest of these bright young things are the cream of the crop. Harvard, Yale, Stanford. What could you possibly have in common with them?"
I opened my mouth to protest, but Brandon steamrolled on.
"Look, I'll be blunt. Your hire was let's call it an experiment in diversity. But I have serious doubts about how long you'll last here. So why don't you just sit quietly over here and try not to embarrass yourself at the company,
Defeated, I slumped into the chair he indicated. As Brandon walked away, I heard him mutter under his breath.
"Yeah, I swear, HR's bleeding heart is going to be the death of this company."
For the next hour, I sat alone at my isolated table, watching as the rest of the new hires laughed and bonded over shared college experiences and summer abroad programs. Every so often, one of them would glance my way with a mixture of curiosity and pity before quickly looking away. I picked at my steak, having lost my appetite. How had I ended up here? Just a few short years ago, I had been on top of the world, co-owner of a thriving restaurant chain. Now, here I was being treated like an unwanted charity case in my own company. The irony was almost too much to bear. Just as I was contemplating making an early exit, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. A stunningly beautiful woman with chestnut hair and bright green eyes had just entered, slightly out of breath. "I'm so sorry I'm late, everyone," she called out cheerfully. "Traffic was an absolute nightmare." Brandon immediately jumped up, practically tripping over himself to greet her.
"Emily, we're so glad you can make it. Please, come sit by me. I've saved you a seat."
As Emily made her way to the main table, her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. Small frowns creased her forehead as she took in my isolated position. Instead of following Brandon, she made a beeline for my table. "Hi there," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm Emily Parker, the new HR director. And you are?" Before I could answer, Brandon materialized at her side.
"Oh, don't worry about him, Emily. That's just Jack, our diversity hire. Now, why don't you come meet the real new talent?"
Emily's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Excuse me, Brandon, but I believe I was speaking to Jack." She turned back to me with a smile. "I'm so sorry about that interruption. You were saying?" I couldn't help but return her smile, feeling a spark of hope for the first time that evening. "Jack Thompson. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Parker." "Please, call me Emily," she insisted. "Now, why on earth are you sitting all the way over here by yourself?" Brandon cut in again, his voice strained.
"Emily, I really must insist."
But Emily wasn't having it. "Brandon, I think it's time we rearrange the seating, don't you? It seems terribly exclusionary to have one of our new hires sitting apart like this." She turned to address the room at large. Everyone, I'd like to propose a toast to our newest team members. All of them. As Emily raised her glass, the rest of the room followed suit, albeit with some confusion. I felt a lump form in my throat at her kindness. Brandon, however, was far from finished. His face had turned an alarming shade of red as he spluttered.
Now, see here, Emily. I don't know what kind of bleeding heart nonsense they taught you at your last job, but here at Sullivan Enterprises, we have standards to maintain. This man,
he jabbed a finger in my direction,
he has no business socializing with our top recruits. He's barely qualified to mop the floors, let alone contribute meaningfully to our organization.
A hush fell over the room. The other new hires looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact. I felt my face burning with humiliation, wishing I could simply disappear. But Emily stood her ground, her green eyes flashing dangerously. Brandon Matthews, I don't know who you think you are, but I can assure you that this kind of discriminatory behavior is completely unacceptable. Jack is just as much a part of this team as anyone else in this room. Brandon sneered.
Ah, please. I've seen his file. No college degree, a string of dead-end restaurant jobs. He's nothing but a liability waiting to happen. Mark my words, he'll be gone within a month, dragging our productivity down with him.
I had heard enough. Rising from my chair, I addressed the room, my voice surprisingly steady. I apologize for the disruption. It's clear that my presence here is causing unnecessary tension. I think it's best if I excuse myself. As I turned to leave, Emily caught my arm. Jack, wait! You don't have to go anywhere. Brandon is the one who should be leaving. But I gently removed her hand, offering a sad smile. It's alright, Emily. I appreciate your kindness, but I don't want to start my career here under a cloud of controversy. Good night, everyone. With as much dignity as I could muster, I walked out of the restaurant, the sound of confused murmuring fading behind me. As the cool night air hit my face, I took a deep breath, trying to process everything that had just happened. I had known it wouldn't be easy, coming back after all these years, but I never imagined it would be quite this painful. As I walked to my car, I couldn't help but think back to where it all began, 10 years ago. 10 years earlier, the kitchen of Joe's Diner was a flurry of activity, the sizzle of burgers on the grill, and the clatter of plates providing a constant backdrop to the organized chaos. I wiped the sweat from my brow as I flipped another row of patties, my mind already on the pile of homework waiting for me at home. At 22, I was older than most of my coworkers, many of whom were high school kids working their first jobs. But I didn't mind. This job was my lifeline, the thing keeping me afloat as I struggled to complete my high school diploma through night classes, while saving for college. Order up! I called, sliding 2 plates across the pass. As I turned back to the grill, I nearly collided with a lanky young man I had never seen before. Whoa, sorry about that, he said with an easy grin. I'm Mike, the new guy. You must be Jack, right? They told me to shadow you tonight. I couldn't help but return his smile. There was something instantly likable about Mike, a warmth and openness that put me at ease. Nice to meet you, Mike. Welcome to the Madhouse. You ever worked a grill before? Mike shook his head, his enthusiasm undimmed. Nope, but I'm a quick learner. Show me the ropes, boss. As we worked side by side that night, I found myself opening up to Mike in a way I rarely did with coworkers. Maybe it was because we were close in age, or maybe it was just a genuine interest. But soon, I was telling him about my dreams of going to college, of breaking the cycle of poverty that had defined my childhood. Man, that's amazing, Mike said, his eyes shining with admiration. You're working a full-time job going to school at night, and still planning for college? You're like a superhero or something. I laughed, feeling a warmth in my chest at his words. Trust me, I'm no superhero. Just a guy trying to make something of himself. As the weeks passed, Mike and I became inseparable. We'd grab breakfast after our night shifts, swapping stories and dreams over greasy eggs and burnt coffee. I learned that Mike came from a wealthy family but had struck out on his own, determined to make his own way in the world. One morning, as we sat in our usual booth, Mike leaned forward with an intensity I'd never seen before. Jack, I've been thinking, what if we didn't have to work for someone else? What if we could start our own place? I nearly choked on my coffee. Our own place? Mike, that's crazy. We're just a couple of line cooks. We don't know the first thing about running a business. Mike's excitement was contagious. Maybe not, but we know food. We know service. And most importantly, we know how to work hard. Come on, Jack. Imagine it. Our own restaurant, doing things our way. No more taking orders from anyone else. I wanted to dismiss the idea, to be the voice of reason. But as Mike painted a picture of our future success, I found myself getting caught up in the dreams. By the time we left the diner that morning, the seed had been planted. Over the next few months, Mike and I threw ourselves into planning. We worked double shifts, squirreling away every penny we could. We spent our free time poring over business books, watching cookie shows, and visiting every restaurant in town to study their menus and operations. Finally, after a year of grueling work and meticulous saving, we had scraped together enough for a small down payment on a rundown diner on the edge of town. It wasn't much. Peeling linoleum floors, ancient equipment, and a location that could generously be called up and coming. But to us, it was perfect. The night before we were set to sign the lease, Mike and I stood outside our future restaurant, staring up at the faded sign that still bore the previous owner's name. "This is it, Jack," Mike said, slinging an arm around my shoulders. "Tomorrow, we become business owners. You scared?" I laughed nervously. Terrified. You? "Absolutely petrified," Mike admitted with a grin. "But you know what? I wouldn't want to be scared of anyone else." As we stood there, dreaming of the future, I felt a surge of affection for my friend. In just over a year, Mike had become more than just a coworker or a business partner. He was the brother I'd never had, the person who believed in me when I struggled to believe in myself. "Hey Mike," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thanks for everything. For believing in me, for pushing me to do this. I don't know where I'd be without you." Mike punched me lightly on the arm, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Don't go getting all sappy on me now, Thompson. Save it for a grand opening speech." We laughed together, sound echoing down the empty street. As scared as I was, I knew that with Mike by my side, we could take on anything. Little did I know that our friendship and our business would soon be tested in ways I never could have imagined. The first year of owning our restaurant, which we christened Jack and Mike's, was a whirlwind of long days, sleepless nights, and more stress than I'd ever experienced in my life. But it was also exhilarating. Every small victory, our first positive review in the local paper, our first day breaking even, our first regular customer, felt like winning the lottery. Mike and I worked in perfect sync, his balanced optimism balancing my more cautious nature. Whenever I saw potential problems, Mike saw opportunities. When I worried about the bottom line, Mike reminded me of the importance of building relationships with our customers and staff. By the end of our first year, we had not only survived but thrived. Our little diner had become a neighborhood institution, known for its friendly atmosphere as much as its delicious comfort food. We were even able to hire a small staff, giving us our first taste of being employers rather than employees. As we celebrated our 1-year anniversary, Mike raised a toast to our success. "To Jack Thompson," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "The best damn business partner and friend a guy could ask for. We did it, buddy. We really did it." I felt a lump in my throat as I clinked my glass against his. "We sure did, Mike. Here's to many more years of success." Little did I know that those words would soon come back to haunt me. As our business grew, so did our ambitions. We opened a second location, then a third. We expanded our menu, hired more staff, and even started catering local events. On paper, everything looked great. Revenue was increasing, and we were becoming known as one of the hottest local restaurant chains in the city. But beneath the surface, cracks were starting to form. Mike and I, once so in sync, found ourselves increasingly at odds. Where I saw the need for caution and careful expansion, Mike wanted to charge full steam ahead. It was all about customer satisfaction, willing to bend over backwards to accommodate every request, no matter how unreasonable or unprofitable. "Mike, we can't keep doing custom orders for every customer who asks," I argued one night after closing. "It's killing our efficiency and our profit margins." Mike frowned, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by frustration. But that's what sets us apart, Jack. Our willingness to go the extra mile. Isn't that what we built this business on? I ran a hand through my hair, exasperated. Yes, but we also built it on being smart with our resources. We're not a mom and pop shop anymore. We have employees to pay, expansion costs to cover. We need to start thinking bigger picture. These arguments became more and more frequent, where once we had balanced each other out, now we seemed to be constantly pulling in opposite directions. Staff started to notice, unsure of whose directives to follow. Things came to a head when Mike collapsed one day in the middle of the lunch rush. I found him in the back office, pale and shaking, barely able to stand. "Mike!" I cried, rushing to his side. "What happened? Are you okay?" He tried to wave me off, but I could see the exhaustion etched deep in his face. "I'm fine, Jack. Just a little tired. I'll be back on my feet in no time." But he wasn't fine. The doctor's verdict was clear. Extreme exhaustion and stress. Mike had been working himself to the bone, taking on more and more responsibilities, trying to personally oversee every aspect of our rapidly growing business. As I sat by his hospital bed watching him sleep, I felt a crushing wave of guilt. How had I not seen how much he was struggling? Had I been so focused on the business that I'd forgotten about the friend who had made it all possible? When Mike was released from the hospital, I tried to convince him to take it easy, delegate more responsibilities. But he was like a man possessed, throwing himself back into work with even more fervor than before. "I'm fine, Jack," he'd insist every time I expressed concern. "This is what it takes to succeed. You of all people should understand that." But I didn't understand. Not anymore. The dream we'd shared, the vision of creating something meaningful together, seemed to be slipping away. In its place was a relentless drive for expansion, for profit, for success at any cost. I tried to be the voice of reason, pull us back to our roots. But every suggestion I made was met with resistance from Mike. He accused me of losing my ambition, of being content with mediocrity. The final straw came when I discovered that Mike had taken out a large loan to finance the opening of 3 new locations, without consulting me. "How could you do this, Mike?" I demanded, waving the loan documents in his face. "This is way too risky. We're already stretched thin as it is." Mike's face hardened, a far cry from the easygoing friend I once knew. "Someone had to make a move, Jack. We can't stay stagnant. This is our chance to really make it big." "Make it big?" I echoed incredulously. "Mike, we've already made it. We have a successful business, loyal customers, a great team. Why isn't that enough?" "Because it's not!" Mike shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. "We started this to be more than just another local joint. We talked about franchising, about going national. Don't you remember our dreams?" I felt a deep sadness settle in my chest. Of course I remember. But not like this, Mike. Not at the cost of our values, our health, our friendship. We stared at each other for a long moment, the weight of years of partnership and shared dreams hanging between us. Finally, I took a deep breath and said the words I've been dreading for months. "I think it's time for me to step away, Mike." The color drained from his face. "What? No, Jack, you can't be serious. We built this together. You can't just walk away." "I'm not walking away," I said softly. "I'm saving us both. This isn't working anymore, Mike. We're pulling in different directions, and it's tearing us apart. I'd rather leave now, while we can still salvage our friendship, than stay and watch it all crumble." Mike's anger deflated, replaced by a desperate plea. "We can fix this, Jack. We've overcome every obstacle so far. Just give me some time. We'll figure it out together, like we always have." I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "I'm sorry, Mike. I really am. But I think this is for the best. You keep pushing forward, chasing those big dreams. I'll find my own path." As I turned to leave, Mike called out, his voice breaking. "Promise me you'll come back someday, Jack. Promise me this isn't the end." I paused at the door, unable to look back. "I promise, Mike. Someday, when we both figure things out, I'll be back. Take care of yourself, buddy." With that, I walked out of the office, out of the restaurant, and out of the life that we built together. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I knew in my heart it was necessary. The next few years were a whirlwind of experiences, free from the responsibilities of running our growing chain. I threw myself into exploring every facet of the restaurant industry. I worked in diners, 5-star restaurants, food trucks, and everything in between. Each job taught me something new. In a bustling New York pizzeria, I learned the importance of efficiency without sacrificing quality. At a farm-to-table restaurant in California, I gained a deeper appreciation for sourcing and sustainability. A stint in a Chicago steakhouse taught me the finer points of high-end service and wine pairing. All the while, I kept tabs on Mike and our old business from afar. True to his word, Mike continued to expand aggressively. Jack and Mike's was now a regional chain, with locations in 3 states. The reviews were mostly positive, but I couldn't help noticing a trend. Complaints about inconsistent quality, impersonal service, staff turnover. It pained me to see our once beloved local joint turning into just another faceless chain. But I resisted the urge to reach out to Mike. We both needed this time apart to grow, to learn, to find our own paths. During my travels, I also focused on my personal development. I finally completed my GED and even took some business courses at community colleges. I read every book on restaurant management and hospitality I could get my hands on. One night, as I sat in a tiny apartment in Seattle, poring over yet another business textbook, I had an epiphany. The key to success in this industry wasn't just about the food or the service, or even the bottom line. It was about balance. Balance between efficiency and personalization, between growth and sustainability, between ambition and values. I thought back to those early days of Mike, how we had complemented each other so perfectly. His balanced optimism and my cautious practicality, his focus on customer experience, and my eye on the financials. We had lost that balance somewhere along the way, and our business, our friendship, had suffered for it. As this realization sank in, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I knew what I had to do. It was time to go home, time to make good on my promise to Mike. But first, I had one more lesson to learn. My journey led me to a small, unassuming restaurant in a quiet Boston suburb. From the outside, it didn't look like much, just another mom-and-pop diner. But I heard whispers in the industry circle about this place, about its owner, an eccentric old man named Frank, who had turned down countless offers to franchise or sell out. I applied for a job as a line cook, not mentioning my past experience as a restaurant owner. Frank hired me on the spot, his roomy eyes twinkling with a wisdom that belied his gruff exterior. Over the next few months, I watched and learned. Frank's diner was a masterclass in everything I've been trying to figure out. The food was simple but perfectly executed. The staff worked with a quiet efficiency that bordered on choreography. And Frank knew every regular by name, remembering their orders and asking about their families. But what impressed me most was how Frank balanced it all. He ran a tight ship, keeping a close eye on cost and efficiency, but he never let that override the human element of the business. He was firm but fair with his staff, generous but not to a fault with his customers. One slow afternoon, as I was preparing for the dinner rush, Frank called me into his office.
"All right, Jack,"
he said, fixing me with a penetrating stare.
"Time to come clean. Who are you really?"
I blinked in surprise. I don't know what you mean, Frank." He chuckled, shaking his head.
"Son, I've been in this business for 50 years. You think I can't spot someone who knows their way around more than just a grill? You've got the eye of an owner, always watching, always calculating. So out with it."
And so, I told him everything. About Mike, about our rise and fall, about my journey of self-discovery. Frank listened silently, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips.
"Well, Jack, sounds like you've learned a lot. But tell me, what's the most important lesson you've taken away from all this?"
I thought for a moment before answering. "Balance," I said finally. "The key is balance. Between ambition and contentment, between efficiency and humanity, it's about creating something that's not just profitable, but meaningful. Something that enriches the lives of your customers, your employees, and yourself." Frank's smile widened.
"Not bad, kid. Not bad at all. Now, one last question. What are you going to do with what you've learned?
I met his gaze steadily. I'm going home, Frank. I made a promise to an old friend, and it's time I kept it. Frank nodded approvingly.
Good answer. Now get out of here. Got a long road ahead of you.
As I turned to leave, Frank called out one last piece of advice.
Remember, Jack, a good restaurant feeds the body. A great restaurant feeds the soul. Never lose sight of that.
Those words ringing in my ears, I set out for home, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The familiar skyline of my hometown came into view as I drove down the interstate. It had been 10 years since I left, but the sight still stirred something deep inside me. This is where it all began, where Mike and I had dared to dream big. As I navigated the city streets, I couldn't help but notice the changes. New buildings had sprung up, old landmarks had disappeared, and there, on seemingly every other corner, was a Jack and Mike's restaurant. The signage was slick and modern, a far cry from our humble first location. I pulled into the parking lot of the original Jack and Mike's, my heart pounding. The old building had been completely renovated, its charming diner aesthetic replaced by a sleek corporate look. It was barely recognizable. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was just as changed as the exterior. Gone were the cozy booths and quirky decor we picked out together. In their place were stark white walls, minimalist furniture, and large TV screens displaying the menu. A bored-looking teenager greeted me from behind the counter.
Welcome to Jack and Mike's. What can I get started for you?
I glanced at the menu board, my heart sinking as I realized I didn't recognize a single item. Where were our signature dishes? The comfort food we prided ourselves on. Actually, I said, I was hoping to speak with the manager. Is Mike Sullivan available? The teen looked confused.
Mike Sullivan? Oh, you mean Mr. Sullivan. He doesn't come to the stores much anymore. You'd have to talk to corporate if you want to reach him.
I thanked her and left, feeling more disheartened than ever. This wasn't the dream Mike and I had shared. This wasn't what we set out to create. Determined to find Mike, I made my way to the corporate headquarters, a gleaming high-rise in the business district. As I approached the reception desk, I steeled myself for what was to come. Hi, I'm here to see Mike Sullivan, I said to the receptionist. She glanced up, looking bored. Do you have an appointment? No, but... I'm sorry, sir, but Mr. Sullivan is very busy. You'll need to schedule an appointment if you want to see him. I was about to argue when a familiar voice called out from across the lobby.
Jack? Jack Thompson. Is that you?
I turned to see Mike striding towards me, a look of disbelief on his face. He looked older, more polished in his expensive suit, but his eyes still held that same spark of energy I remembered. Mike, I said, a lump forming in my throat. It's been a long time. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Then Mike broke into a wide grin and pulled me into a bear hug.
You son of a gun!
He laughed, pounding me on the back.
You actually came back. Come on, let's go up to my office. We have a lot to catch up on.
As we rode the elevator to the top floor, Mike filled me in on the company's growth. They now had over 100 locations across 5 states, with plans to go national within the year.
Been a wild ride, Jack,
Mike said, his eyes shining with pride.
We're doing things I never thought possible. Wait till you see the numbers.
But as Mike showed me around his plush office, talking excitedly about expansion plans and profit margins, I felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't the Mike I knew. The passion for food, for creating experiences, for touching people's lives. It seems to have been replaced by a single-minded focus on growth and profits. Finally, unable to contain myself any longer, I interrupted Mike's monologue about their latest marketing campaign. Mike, I said softly, what happened to our original vision? To creating a place where people felt at home, where the food was made with love, where every customer is treated like family. Mike's smile faltered.
Come on, Jack. We were naive back then. This is business. We've got shareholders to answer to now. Expansion goes to meet. We can't afford to be sentimental.
Can't afford to be sentimental? I repeated, incredulous. Mike, sentiment is what made us special. It's what made people choose us over the big chains. Don't you see what you've become? Mike's face hardened.
What I've become is successful. I built an empire, Jack. Something you walked away from.
The words stung, but I pressed on. I walked away because we were losing sight of what mattered. And looking around now, I can see I was right to be worried. For a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in Mike's eyes, but then his expression closed off.
If you came back just to criticize, maybe it's better if you leave again.
I sighed, feeling a deep sadness settle over me. I didn't come to criticize, Mike. I came because I made a promise. Because despite everything, you're still my friend. And because I think, deep down, you know this isn't what we dreamed of. Mike turned away, staring out the window at the city below. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, almost too quietly for me to hear, Mike whispered,
I don't know how to fix it, Jack. It's too big now. Too many people depending on me. Too much at stake.
I stepped up beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. We fix it together, Mike. Just like we started it together. It won't be easy, but if anyone can do it, it's us. Mike turned to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears.
You really mean that? You'd be willing to come back after all this time?
I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. On one condition. We go back to our roots. Remember why we started this in the first place. It's not just about making money, Mike. It's about making a difference. A slow smile spread across Mike's face. Not the polished corporate smile I'd seen earlier, but the genuine, warm smile of my old friend.
Alright, Jack. Let's do it. Let's remind everyone why they fell in love with Jack and Mike's in the first place.
As we shook hands, sealing our renewed partnership, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The road ahead would be challenging, but with Mike by my side once again, I knew we could face anything. Little did I know, our first challenge was waiting for us just outside the door, in the form of a certain VP of operations who was about to get the surprise of his life. The next morning, I found myself back in that upscale steakhouse, this time seated at the head table with Mike by my side. The room was buzzing with nervous energy as the new hires, including those from last night's disastrous dinner, filed in. Brandon Matthews strode in last, his face darkening when he saw me.
What's the meaning of this?
He demanded.
I thought it made clear that you weren't welcome here.
Before I could respond, Mike stood up, his face set in a stern expression I'd rarely seen.
Brandon, I'd like you to meet Jack Thompson, my co-founder and newly reinstated co-CEO of Sullivan Enterprises.
The room fell silent. Brandon's jaw dropped, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally horror as the realization of his mistake sank in.
But,
he stammered.
Your resume, the restaurant jobs.
I couldn't help but smile. All true. Mike and I built this company from the ground up, starting as line cooks. Every job on that resume taught me something valuable about this industry and about leadership. Mike nodded, adding,
Jack's been on a 10-year journey, learning from the best in the business. And now, he's back to help us remember what made us special in the first place.
Brandon looked like he might faint.
Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thompson, I had no idea. Please, allow me to apologize for my behavior last night. It was completely unacceptable and...
I held up a hand to stop him. You're right, Brandon. It was unacceptable. Not just to me, but to any employee. That kind of elitist, discriminatory attitude has no place in our company. Mike continued, his voice firm but not unkind.
We've strayed too far from our values, Brandon. Jack's return is going to herald some big changes around here. Changes that will bring us back to what really matters. Our people, our food, and our community.
Brandon nodded vigorously, practically tripping over himself to agree. But I wasn't finished. However, I said, I don't believe in writing people off for one mistake, no matter how serious. So here's what's going to happen. You're being demoted to store manager at our original location. Brandon's eyes widened in panic.
Store manager? But I'm the VP of operations. I have an MBA from Harvard.
I leaned forward, fixing him with a steady gaze. Exactly. You've forgotten what it means to be on the front lines, to connect with our customers and staff. So, you're going back to basics. Prove to us that you can embody the values that built this company, and we'll reconsider your position in 6 months. As Brandon slumped into a chair, looking shell-shocked, I addressed the rest of the room. To all new hires, I want to apologize for the confusion and discomfort you may have experienced. This is not how we typically welcome new members to our team, but I hope this serves as an important lesson. At Jack and Mike's, we value character, hard work, and compassion above all else. Your backgrounds, your degrees, they're important, but they're not everything. What matters most is how you treat people, your colleagues, your customers, and your community. Mike nodded in agreement, adding, "We started this company with a simple dream, to create a place where people felt at home, where good food brought folks together. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. But starting today, we're getting back to our roots." The room was silent, everyone hanging on our every word. I could see a mix of emotions on the faces around me. Confusion, excitement, and more than a little apprehension. One brave soul, a young woman with bright eyes and a determined set to her jaw, raised her hand. "Mr. Thompson, Mr. Sullivan?" She began hesitantly. "I'm excited about this new direction, but... well, what does this mean for us? For the company?" I smiled, appreciating her directness. "Great question. It means we're going to be making some big changes. We're going to be reevaluating every aspect of our business, from our menu to our corporate structure. We'll be looking at ways to empower our store managers, to source more ingredients locally, to give back to our communities. And we're going to need all of you to help us do it." Mike jumped in, his old enthusiasm shining through. "Think of it as a challenge. We want your fresh perspectives, your innovative ideas. How can we stay true to our roots while still growing and evolving? That's what we need you to help us figure out." The young woman nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think I can get behind that." As the meeting continued, I could feel the energy in the room shift. The initial tension melted away, replaced by a palpable sense of excitement and purpose. Even Brandon, still reeling from his demotion, seemed to be listening intently, a thoughtful expression on his face. By the time we wrapped up, there was a buzz in the air. As the new hires filed out, many of them stopped to shake our hands, their eyes shining with enthusiasm for the journey ahead. Once the room had cleared, Mike turned to me with a grin. "Well, partner, I'd say that went pretty well. Ready to shake things up?" I laughed, feeling a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. "You bet. But first, I think we need to pay a visit to our old stomping grounds. What do you say we go flip some burgers for old time's sake?" Mike's grin widened. "I thought you never ask." The next morning found Mike and I standing in the kitchen of our very first Jack and Mike's location. The gleaming stainless steel surfaces and high-tech equipment were a far cry from the beat-up-old grill and mismatched pots and pans we started with. The layout was still familiar. We arrived before the morning shift, wanting to get a feel for the place without the bustle of the regular staff. As I ran my hand along the counter, memories came flooding back. Late nights perfecting recipes, early mornings preparing for the breakfast rush, the camaraderie we'd share with our small dedicated team. "Remember that first month?" Mike said softly, faraway look in his eyes. "When we were so broke we had to take turns sleeping on the cot in the back office?" I chuckled. How could I forget? I still have nightmares about that lumpy mattress. But you know what? I don't think I've ever been happier than I was back then. Everything was a struggle, but it was our struggle. We were building something together. Mike nodded, a wistful smile on his face. "We sure were. God, I miss those days sometimes. Don't get me wrong, I'm proud of what we've accomplished, but somewhere along the way we lost that spark," I finished for him. "The passion, the personal touch. That's what we need to get back." Just then, the back door opened. A hairy-looking man in his early 30s burst in, nearly dropping the stack of papers he was carrying when he saw us.
"Mr. Sullivan, I didn't expect to see you here, and..."
His eyes widened as he recognized me from the meeting yesterday.
"Mr. Thompson, welcome back, sir."
I glanced at his name tag. "You must be Derek, the store manager. Nice to meet you." Derek nodded nervously.
"Yes, sir. Is everything okay? We weren't expecting an inspection today."
Mike laughed, clapping Derek on the shoulder.
"Relax, Derek. This isn't an inspection. Jack and I were here to work the morning shift."
Derek's jaw dropped.
But sir, you're the CEO. Both of you are."
I grinned, already reaching for an apron. "Today, we're just a couple of short-order cooks. Now, how about you show us the ropes? I hear you changed the menu quite a bit since my day." For the next hour, Derek walked us through the new systems and procedures, his initial nervousness giving way to a pride as he explained the efficiencies he implemented. I had to admit, some of the changes were impressive, but others... Wait! I interrupted as Derek was explaining their new streamlined breakfast menu. What happened to Mike's famous flapjacks? And my hangover hash browns? Derek looked uncomfortable.
Oh, those were phased out in the last menu update. Corporate felt they weren't cost-effective enough.
Mike and I exchanged a look. Those dishes have been customer favorites, the kind of signature items people would drive across town for. Before we could discuss it further, the first staff members began to arrive for their morning shift. The look of shock on their faces as they recognized us were almost comical. Alright team, I called out, clapping my hands together. I know this is unexpected, but Mike and I are here to work alongside you today. We want to get a real feel for how things are running. And there's no better way to do that than to get our hands dirty. So, who's ready for the breakfast rush? There was a moment of stunned silence, then a tentative cheer went up. As we got to work, I could feel the energy in the kitchen staff. The staff, initially stiff and formal around us, began to relax as they saw us dive into the work. Mike manned the grill like he never left, effortlessly flipping pancakes and eggs while keeping up a steady stream of cheerful banter. I took over the prep station, chopping vegetables and mixing batters, pausing occasionally to chat with the staff and get their thoughts on the restaurant. As the morning wore on, I began to see both the strengths and weaknesses of our current system. The staff was well trained and efficient, but there was a mechanical quality to their work. The warmth and personal touch that had once been our hallmark was noticeably absent. During a lull in service, I pulled Derek aside. Hey, I noticed we're not really interacting much with the customers. What happened to our policy of getting to know the regulars? Derek shifted uncomfortably.
Well, we found that table visits slowed down service times. And with the new automated ordering system, there's less need for direct customer interaction.
I frowned. Efficiency was important, sure, but at what cost? Derek, do me a favor. For the rest of the shift, I want you to encourage the staff to chat with the customers. Nothing that slows service, just be friendly. Get to know them a little. Can you do that? Derek nodded, looking a bit uncertain but willing to try. As the lunch rush hit, I watched with satisfaction as the atmosphere in the restaurant began to change. Staff members were smiling more, customers were lingering over their meals, engaged in conversation. The place was starting to feel like home again. By the time we wrapped up the shift, everyone was exhausted but buzzing with energy. Mike and I gathered the staff for a quick debrief.
First off, I want to thank you for all being so accommodating today,
Mike began.
We know it's not every day your CEO shows up to flip burgers.
There was a ripple of laughter through the group. I picked up where Mike left off. We learned a lot today, and we hope you did too. We saw some great things. Your efficiency, your teamwork. But we also saw areas where we lost touch with what made Jack and Mike special in the first place. I paused, looking around at the eager faces. Starting today, we're going to be making some changes. We're bringing back some of our old favorite menu items. We're going to encourage more interaction with our customers. And most importantly, we're going to start listening more. To you, to our customers, to our community.
This isn't going to be easy,
Mike added.
Change never is. But we believe in this team, and we believe in the heart of what Jack and Mike's has always been about. Good food, good people, and a place that feels like home.
As we wrapped up the meeting, I could see a new light in the eyes of our staff. The energy in the room was palpable, a mix of excitement and determination that reminded me of our early days. Derek approached us as the staff was filing out.
Mr. Thompson, Mr. Sullivan?
He began, his voice firm despite his obvious nervousness.
I want to apologize. I think somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what this place was really about. But today reminded me of why I fell in love with this job in the first place. If you'll have me, I'd like to be a part of making Jack and Mike's great again.
Mike and I exchanged a smile. Derek, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. That's exactly what we wanted to hear. Welcome aboard, for real this time. As we left the restaurant that evening, the sun setting behind the city skyline, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We had a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in years, I was excited about the future of Jack and Mike's. We were going back to our roots, but we were also moving forward. And this time, we were going to do it right. Little did I know, our journey was about to take an unexpected turn. one that would challenge everything we thought we knew about running our business. But that's a story for another day. Weeks passed as Mike and I threw ourselves into revitalizing Jack and Mike's. We visited every location, worked shifts, talked to staff and customers. We brought back old menu favorites and introduced new items based on local taste. We implemented training programs focused on customer interaction and community engagement. The changes weren't always easy. Some franchise owners pushed back, worried about profit margins. Some longtime employees struggled to adapt to the new, old way of doing things. But slowly, surely, we started to see results. Customer satisfaction scores were climbing. Staff turnover was decreasing. There was a buzz about Jack and Mike's again, reminiscent of our early days. Then, on a chilly autumn morning, everything changed. I was in my office, reviewing plans for the latest community outreach program, when my assistant burst in, her face pale. "Jack, you need to see this," she said, thrusting a tablet into my hands. On the screen was a viral video, clearly shot in one of our restaurants. It showed a Jack and Mike's employee in a heated argument with a customer. The employee was yelling, gesticulating wildly, while the customer cowered in their seat. As I watched in horror, the employee picked up a plate and hurled it against the wall. My stomach dropped. This was a PR nightmare. Everything we've been working towards, all the goodwill we built up, could be undone in an instant. I immediately called Mike, and within the hour, we were in crisis mode. Our PR team was working overtime, trying to get ahead of the story. We issued a statement condemning the behavior and promising a full investigation, but the damage was done. The video was everywhere, and people were calling for boycotts. As we delved deeper into the incident, a more complex picture emerged. The employee in question, a young man named Tony, had been with us for years. He was known for his friendly demeanor and strong work ethic. The customer, it turned out, had been berating him for over an hour, using racial slurs and threatening to get him fired. None of this excused Tony's behavior, but it did complicate the narrative. We were faced with a difficult decision. The easy path would be to fire Tony, make a public apology, and move on. It's what our lawyers advised, what many of our franchise owners were demanding. But something about that didn't sit right with me. It felt too much like the old Jack and Mike's, the one that prioritized image over people. After a long discussion, Mike and I decided to take a different approach. We invited Tony and the customer to sit down with us, along with a professional mediator. It was a risky move. There was no guarantee either party would agree, and even if they did, the meeting could easily backfire. To our surprise, both Tony and the customer, a middle-aged man named Frank, agreed to the meeting. What followed was one of the most intense and ultimately rewarding experiences of my career. For 4 hours, we sat in a conference room, listening as Tony and Frank shared their sides of the story. There were tears, raised voices, moments where I was sure one or both of them would walk out. But slowly, painfully, understanding began to emerge. Frank, we learned, had been having the worst day of his life. He just lost his job, his wife was leaving him, and he lashed out in anger and fear. Tony, for his part, had been dealing with a sick mother and mounting medical bills. The stress had been building for weeks, and Frank's words had been the final straw. As the meeting progressed, something remarkable happened. Frank, his voice choked with emotion, apologized to Tony.
"I was wrong," he said. "I was hurting, and I took it out on you. That's no excuse for what I said or did. I'm so sorry."
Tony, tears in his eyes, accepted the apology.
I'm sorry too,
He said,
I should never have lost my temper like that. No matter what was said, I represent Jack and Mike's, and I let everyone down.
By the end of the meeting, not only had Tony and Frank reconciled, but they had also come up with a joint proposal. They wanted to work together to create a campaign about respect and understanding in customer service. It was a bold idea, one that could easily backfire if not handled correctly. Mike and I exchanged a look. This was a crossroads moment for Jack and Mike's. We could play it safe, sweep this under the rug and move on, or we could take a risk, be transparent about our mistakes, and try to turn this into a learning opportunity for everyone. After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. "Let's do it," I said, "but we're going to need to be completely open about what happened. No sugarcoating, no PR spin, just the truth, as messy and complicated as it is." And so, we embarked on what would be known as the Respect Serves Everyone campaign. We released a video featuring Tony and Frank, telling their story in their own words. We implemented new training programs focused on de-escalation and stress management. We partner with local community organizations to host workshops on communication and conflict resolution. The response was overwhelming. Sure, we faced some backlash from those who thought we were being too lenient or making excuses for bad behavior. For the most part, people appreciated our honesty and our commitment to doing better. In the weeks that followed, we saw a surge of customer loyalty. Our employees reported feeling more supported and valued. And perhaps most surprisingly, we started getting calls from other businesses, asking how they can implement similar programs. As the dust settled, Mike and I found ourselves in my office, reflecting on everything that had happened.
You know,
Mike said, leaning back in his chair.
10 years ago, we would have handled this completely differently.
I nodded, thinking back to our younger, more impulsive selves. We probably would have fired Tony on the spot, issued a generic apology, and hoped it all blew over quickly. Mike chuckled.
And we would have missed out on this incredible opportunity to make a real difference.
I smiled, feeling a surge of pride in how far we come. It's funny, isn't it? We started this business thinking success was all about growth and profits. But it turns out, the most valuable things we've created are the relationships with our employees, our customers, our community.
Speaking of relationships,
Mike said, his tone turning serious.
There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about.
I raised an eyebrow, curious. Oh? What's on your mind? Mike took a deep breath.
I've been thinking, maybe it's time for me to step back a bit. Not retire exactly, but take on more of an advisory role.
I felt the pang of alarm. Mike, if this is about the stress or the workload, we can figure something out. I can't imagine running this place without you. He held up a hand, smiling.
It's not that, Jack. I love this work. I'm incredibly proud of what we built together. But I'm not getting any younger, and there's a lot I still want to do. Travel, spend more time with my family, maybe write that cookbook we've always talked about.
I leaned back, processing this. Part of me wanted to argue, to convince Mike to stay, but I could see the determination in his eyes, and I knew this wasn't a decision he'd made lightly. You're sure about this? I asked. Mike nodded.
I am. But don't worry. I'm not abandoning ship. I'll still be involved. Just less hands-on. And I have some ideas about who might be ready to step up and take on more responsibility.
As Mike outlined his thoughts, I found myself getting excited despite my initial reservations. This was an opportunity to bring in fresh perspective, to mentor the next generation of leaders at Jack and Mike's. All right, I said finally. This is what you want. I support you. But you know this means you're going to have to actually write that cookbook now, right? No more excuses. Mike laughed, the tension breaking.
Deal. Only if you agreed to be my official taste tester.
As we shook on it, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness at the end of an era, excitement for what was to come, and above all, deep gratitude for the friendship that had weathered so many storms. Little did I know, the biggest challenge of my career was just around the corner. But that's a story for another time. The news of Mike's decision to step back sent ripples through the company. There was concern, naturally. Mike had been the face of Jack and Mike's for so long. It was hard for some to imagine the place without him. But there was also a sense of anticipation, a feeling that we were on the cusp of something new and exciting. In the weeks that followed, Mike and I spent countless hours discussing the future of the company. We pored over personal files, had long conversations with our management team, and debated the merits of various candidates to take on larger roles. One name kept coming up. Emily Parker, our HR director. She had been with us for several years now, and had played a crucial role in implementing many of our recent changes. Her combination of empathy and business acumen reminded me a lot of Mike in our early days. When we approached Emily about taking on a more significant leadership role, her response surprised us both. I'm honored that you're considering me, she said, her green eyes serious. But before I give you an answer, I think there's someone else you need to consider. Emily went on to tell us about Brandon Matthews, the same Brandon who had once treated me so poorly, who we had demoted to store manager as a wake-up call. According to Emily, Brandon had undergone a remarkable transformation in the past year. He's completely turned that store around, Emily explained. Customer satisfaction is through the roof. Employee retention is the highest in the company. And he's implemented some incredible innovative community outreach programs. But more than that, he's become a mentor to his staff. The way they talk about him, it's like he's a completely different person. Mike and I exchanged a look. This was unexpected, to say the least. "I think we need to pay Brandon a visit," Mike said. The next day, we arrived unannounced at Brandon's store. What we saw amazed us. The place was buzzing with energy. Staff members were smiling and chatting with customers. The walls were covered with photos of community events and letters of thanks from local organizations. And in the middle of it all was Brandon, expertly juggling tasks, offering encouragement to his team, and warmly greeting regulars by name. When he saw us, he froze for a moment, then straightened his shoulders and approached with a nervous smile.
Mr. Thompson, Mr. Sullivan,
He said, extending his hand.
this is an unexpected pleasure. What can I do for you?
I couldn't help but smile at the contrast between this Brandon and the arrogant executive I'd met a year ago. Actually, Brandon, we're here to talk about what you can do for us. Over the next hour, we sat with Brandon in his tiny office, listening as he shared his journey over the past year. He spoke of his initial anger and resentment at being demoted, of the humbling experience of having to relearn the business from the ground up. But most importantly, he talked about the lessons he learned, about empathy, about the value of every team member, about the true meaning of leadership.
I was wrong
He said, his voice thick with emotion.
about so many things. I thought leadership was about being the smartest person in the room, about making the tough decisions no one else would make. But I've learned it's really about bringing out the best in others, about creating an environment where everyone can thrive.
As Brandon spoke, I could see Mike nodding approvingly. When Brandon finished, Mike leaned forward.
Brandon, how would you feel about bringing that philosophy to a larger stage?
Brandon's eyes widened as he realized what Mike was suggesting.
Are you offering me a promotion?
I smiled. We're offering you an opportunity, Brandon, to help shape the future of Jack and Mike's. It won't be easy. You'll have a lot to prove to a lot of people, but we think you're up for the challenge. What do you say? Brandon was quiet for a long moment, his face a mix of emotions. Finally, he squared his shoulders and met our gaze.
I say, thank you. For this opportunity, yes. But more than that, for the wake-up call a year ago. You could have fired me, but instead, you gave me a chance to learn and grow. I won't let you down.
As we left Brandon's store that day, I felt a renewed sense of optimism about the future of Jack and Mike's. We had always believed in second chances, in the power of people to change and grow. Brandon was living proof of that philosophy. Over the next few months, we worked closely with Brandon and Emily, grooming them for larger roles within the company. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were disagreements, setbacks, moments of doubt. But through it all, I saw the same spark that had driven Mike and me in our early days. The passion to create something meaningful, to make a difference in people's lives. As Mike's official retirement day approached, we decided to throw a company-wide celebration. It was a bittersweet affair, filled with laughter, tears, and a whole lot of reminiscing. At the end of the night, Mike and I found ourselves back where it all began, in the kitchen of our very first Jack and Mike's location. As we stood there, surrounded by the gleaming equipment and lingering scent of burgers and fries, I felt a lump form in my throat.
We did good, didn't we?
Mike said softly, his eyes misty. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After a moment, I managed to say, "We did, but it's not over yet. This is just the beginning of our new chapter." Mike grinned, clapping me on the shoulder.
You're right about that. And speaking of new chapters,
He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manuscript.
first draft of that cookbook. You ready to start taste testing?
I laughed, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Yes, things were changing, but the heart of Jack and Mike's, the friendship, the passion, the commitment to making people's lives a little bit better, one meal at a time, that would never change. As Mike and I left the restaurant that night, I felt a sense of excitement for what the future held. We had built something truly special, and now we were entrusting it to a new generation of leaders. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but with the lessons we learned, the team we'd built, and the values we held dear, I knew that Jack and Mike's would continue to thrive, evolve, and make a positive impact for years to come. And as for Mike and me, well, we had a cookbook to perfect. After all, retirement didn't mean we were done creating. It just meant we had new adventures ahead. Who knows? Maybe Jack and Mike's home cooking would be the next big thing. But that, as they say, is a story for another day.